All right. So it's been longer than I wanted it to be between recording sessions. You know how it goes. I get in my head about not getting in my head. So let's skip all that and let's talk about what we're talking about today. Let's get right into it. Today, I already have my title. Today we're gonna talk about vindication. Specifically, we're gonna talk about how the sweet taste of vindication turns to ashes in your mouth. Like that Megadeth song. My actual favorite Megadeth song. So, now that I've said the title, instead of leaving it somewhere in the middle for you to be like, oh, he said the title! Like that thing in Family Guy, that Peter Griffin moment. So instead of doing that, I've said the title, and now we're going to work backward from the title. Well, vindication. I think that we all know what vindication is, and then I'm always wrong when I think what we all know. So, without looking it up, because I'm not prepared for this, vindication is that particular feeling of having been right at the end of a long series of travails questioning your righteousness. And what I've noticed is that vindication might be the pattern which we will look back on 2023 and recollect upon. Now, I can only think about, and a lot of why it's taken me so long to return to this microphone is I can only think of two examples. And so I've already introduced in the first episode that in order to say that you have a pattern, you have to have three examples, because one example is an incidence, two examples is a coincidence, and three examples is a pattern. And so the only examples, and of course I can only think of one example right off the top of my head, but the only example that's really jumping off the top of my head is the American national women's soccer team. And how do I want to say this? Because I think there are two ways that I could say this, and I tried to say them at the same time. The women's national soccer team in itself, their pay, their whole feminist agenda, that was in scare quotes, but the whole feminist agenda as regards the women's national soccer team is largely irrelevant to my life. I don't follow the sport, and I don't much care. I get my workplace drama from the NFL, and frankly, the people who get paid in the NFL have the same issue. And so maybe my other examples that are floating around in my mind to make it a pattern of how 2023 is the year of vindication turning to ash in your mouth is that a lot of the battles that have been fought the last 5 years are turning over on their heads. And I guess the reason I began that was I'm thinking about there are a lot of NFL contracts that are doing the same thing. And in an abstract sort of broad kind of way, if you know what's going on with the running backs in the NFL where they're upset that they're not being paid their value, that's a sort of vindication as well. And what I'm noticing, specifically vis-a-vis the American women's soccer team, because I can't even remember my second example now. The American women's soccer team is the ashes in the mouth half of the vindication, I believe, is pretty readily apparent. I mean, they lost. They got this big contract. They made all this hullabaloo over the course of the last 2 years, and then they just get shit smacked right in the fucking mouth in their first game. Don't even show up and play. And that, to me, is what I mean when I say the sweet taste of vindication, it turns to ashes in your mouth, is that. Sure, you won your court case, you got your pay, and then you proved your argument facile and lacking righteousness in your first exposition. It's just like, it's just so perfectly ironic. It's so perfectly ironic that it encapsulates the entire feminist, third wave feminist, and woke ideology. And then the other way that I could really think about how this is interesting and relevant to me is that conversation that I've been kind of having with myself about my understanding of the yeoman revolution. And I could frame what's going on with these women with what went on with women in the 17th century. Because I'm reading Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders. And so a lot of me wants to, because of the recency bias of that book being yet unfinished, and my interest in the Wars of the Roses waning because the presenters of the Wars of the Roses either are too overwhelmed by the material to make it make sense in one book, or are too insecure about their own ability to tell the story that they won't just stretch it across several. Which is what it is. So, Moll Flanders, if you don't know, because I didn't know, Moll Flanders is a book by Daniel Defoe, and I don't know otherwise why he's famous. I'd never read any of his work, and we didn't talk about him in high school. English or literature. I think he wrote the letters, the something to do with the letters from the fire, I think, or letters about the fire, or I'm pretty sure he wrote that book about the fire of London. But Moll Flanders is an interesting sort of book. So it starts out and it quibbles with itself a lot, and I thought that I wasn't going to like it, but I've really come to like it. And I think the reason it quibbles with itself is because I'm not sure that Daniel Defoe has a great love for women as a sex, or had a great love for women as a sex. But I think that through writing Moll Flanders, he came to appreciate them in a greater way, because the first act of the book, I would say, like the first environment in which Moll is set, is herself and set, is not very kind to her or to the sex of women. But as the book goes on, it becomes much more kind to the sex of women and much more unkind to the sex of men, which makes you think that the audience was men and not women. The intended audience was women, but the built-in audience would have obviously been women. And I'm already miles off from the subject at hand. I did it. I said what I want to talk about, and what I want to talk about is Vindication. And I guess why I'm thinking about Moll Flanders, other than the recency bias and in terms of Vindication, is every time her character is vindicated in this book, every time her righteousness is proved, or something good happens to her, something else bad in equal or new measure happens. And now, I don't know off the top, I don't know for a fact, but I am fairly certain that there was a historical person named Moll Flanders. Now, as explained in the book, the Moll and the Flanders are both pseudonyms, but my understanding is that there was Moll Cutpurse was a real woman, in that she was a famed or infamous woman. She was a pickpocket. And Moll Flanders lived some century later, and I thought that I understood her to be a brothel and inn owner who was friends with Shakespeare in Bath, actually. And so I've been reading / I've actually been listening to, but I've been consuming this book on the understanding, or at least on the suspension of disbelief, that this was a real person and that these things really happened. Not only because the author has done, because you're supposed to talk about books you're supposed to talk about the contents of a book in the present tense, but the author did such a good job of what I didn't do And I think this is what I'm thinking about. I think that it's now that I've introduced that what I'm talking about is vindication, and that everything that we're going to be talking about from here out is circling around vindication. I think what I'm approaching doing is, I think that I need to revisit representation as a whole, because I did a terrible job of talking about it. I was talking to myself, and I knew that I was doing a bad job, and I knew that I was going to do a bad job, and that it would be a topic that we would be abstractly, we meaning I and you if you're listening, and a return listener, we'll be discussing frequently. But I find that when I'm reading, consuming, when this book is being read to me, however you prefer that I say it, just know that when I say I'm reading, that's what I mean. When I'm reading this book, I keep thinking about how the book is written for a contemporary audience. And so it's not a historical fiction. And so if it's fiction, it's not an historical fiction. And if it's nonfiction, it's not historical nonfiction. And by historical, I mean it's not set in the past. It's a work of history in that, it's a work of contemporary history, and that the things that you, the person who lives 1, 2, 3, however many hundred, I guess it'd be like almost 500 years after the events of this book, they leave the things that you would really like to know and don't know subtextual or even metatextual, as in like in other books. They're not even in this book because everybody knows them. And so like the book would, I guess what I'm thinking about is my critique of the Wars of the Roses, contiguous with Moll Flanders, because for instance, Moll Flanders has next to no quotated is probably actually correct, but next to no quotational dialogue. So most of the dialogue is summarized. He said this, I said this, long story short, this is what we decided. And now I binged 8 to 10 hours in a row of the book yesterday, depending on breaks and being interrupted for society. That may have been 6 to 8. I'm not going to double check my work. It's probably only 4. But anyway, I binged it yesterday. I listened to a whole bunch of it, like the first 3 or 4 acts or however many it is. I don't know how long it is ultimately. But I was binging it yesterday, and I don't remember why I started saying that. What did I just say? But if he had treated the dialogue, if he had treated all of the interactions among all the characters the way that I am in my prose and my work, this book would be infinitely long, next to nearly infinitely long. In fact, he could make it infinitely long. With the dialogue, because there are so many characters that come and go off the stage that don't even get names, that play important roles to the scene but not to the work, that the dialogue could be infinite. And the first thing that sparked my attachment to it was the first setup is so obviously it's so obviously an Arthurian romance that it makes the teeth hurt, like when you've had your favorite cake too many days in a row or something like that. That's not right. It didn't really make my teeth hurt. It was comforting. There was a mild pain, like I should have figured out sooner that I'm allowed to retell these stories that are 1,000 years old exactly as they're set up. People like the setup. They don't want different happenings. They want to know how my creativity or what I didn't like about the book or how I would have done the book differently. So my creative work is in a lot of ways putting those dialogues, those talky talks, into the places where in a work as comprehensive and large as Moll Flanders, which is the autobiography. It's supposed to be the memoir, the autobiography of a woman who at this point, she's in her 50s, and she's told me every significant detail of her life from birth until 50. And then, this podcast isn't about Rob, but if you push Rob out, I'm 8 hours into the listening of this story, and it's all been summarized with next to no specific dialogue, and actually next to no specific action until she becomes Moll Flanders nearly 6 hours into the story. She's like 48 when she becomes the titular Moll Flanders, when she takes that name. And Rob Rob leaves, he's 1100 years old or something. And so if I were going to skim even 1 year of his life would still require the length and the depth and the detail of book that Daniel Defoe has, and a modern audience is completely unwilling to read a book that has expositionary dialogue only. We need set piece dialogue. We need everything in the dialogue. Modern writing is all about the characters saying everything that's happening. Even the stage direction is included in the dialogue. I don't remember who I was watching recently. I was watching a critique of basically I was watching a critique of Shakespeare actually, and someone was it wasn't a critique of Shakespeare, it was an explication or it was explaining things about Shakespeare that the modern audience doesn't understand, and one of them is that the Shakespeare play was an audiobook performed by a cast. Only the very wealthy and the most wealthy, this isn't true about, only the very wealthy people that had paid almost exorbitant prices could actually see the stage at all. Everybody else was down in the pit, like in a metal show, like in a Tool show. So everybody's down in the pit and they can't see anything. And for the most part, they're doing exactly what you're doing in a metal show or a punk show or a rock and roll show. And they're barely paying attention to the performance. They're there to hang out with their friends. That's funny to me. So what I'm doing with my literary and my philosophical works they're outdated by so many hundreds of years. And that gives me a certain jollity. I'm not going to lie. It makes me feel a certain kind of good way that, okay, well, at least what I want to do creatively, these things that I'm trying to do, they at least have a home. There's at least a genre for them, even if I'm the only person performing in the genre. Where there's one person who wants to do it, there's another person who wants it done to them. So there's at least one of you out there who will come back for this. I can know that. And there's at least another one of you going, you have talked for 17 minutes and 15 seconds, and you've gone so far away from your topic, neither of us remembers it. And you're right. So what was my topic? Vindication. Vindication is that feeling of winning. And I guess in a lot of ways I am feeling vindicated for never thinking that the women's soccer team was righteous in their claim to deserve more money. In the same way that I suppose that NFL fans felt vindicated when I don't think it was Vince Wilfork. It was the other defensive tackle. I can't remember his name around that time, who played with the Washington football team at the time. Well, not at the time. I don't need to say at the time if I don't say their racist name, right? So if I don't say the name that I have to bleep out, I don't have to qualify not bleeping it out by saying that's what they were actually called at the time. But anyway, the Washington football team, they signed a nose tackle for all this money, and then it turned out that he hated being there, so he didn't play well until they would let him out of the contract or whatever. But which is malicious noncompliance, which needs to be its own topic in its own right. And so maybe what this is vindication. The vindication of the vindication which follows proceeds malicious noncompliance turns to ashes in your mouth, because what have you made? What have you done? What are you actually vindicated for? And then what does your vindication mean? And then what do you do with it other than, immediately turn around and religious language sin? And sin so badly that you undermine and make an ironic joke of your original the hill that you originally wanted to die on. And I think that what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about vindication as another example is I'm broadly thinking about the liberal worldview, and I'm broadly thinking about people my own age who are liberals. Because, again, like everyone, are we in month 9 yet? Today that I'm recording is July, August, 8/29. So 8/29 is a few days away from 9/11. I never learned the month, so I skipped that. I skipped that day or that class or whatever, however you want to that week of elementary school. And yes, I did used to skip kindergarten. I used to just not feel like going and not go, because I walked to school. So I struggle to talk about this, but I did talk about this. I asked the question when I was talking on extreme individualism: at what point is the individual responsible for their own life, and at what point I've had some interesting conversations with individuals about this, and they disagree with me that it's as young as 2, and they would most certainly disagree with my parents that it was as young as 5. Most people don't think that children are ever that a child ever truly becomes an independent. Most parents don't think that a child ever becomes a truly independent being capable of protecting themselves without the parent. And I suppose that Moll Flanders, in a lot of ways, is teaching me that and is talking about that. I'm not expecting... Look. If you haven't... This isn't about spoilers. This conversation, Vindication, isn't about spoilers. I need to get back to talking about how the liberal left they chase Vindication, and I need to explain why I was thinking about 9/11 and how that made sense, and I need to get back to that. But I need to chase this down too real fast. So between acts, and I suppose that what I mean when I say acts in the life of Moll Flanders is, I guess I mean between husbands, because she bounces from man to man to man to man to man, but the author, through her voice, like repeatedly repeats, or makes a mantra almost within the text of repeating that she has no choice but to do this. So her first husband dies, her second husband runs out on her to France, her third husband turns out to be her biological brother, her fourth husband turns out to be penniless and in debt and was marrying her for money that she didn't have, so they divorce mutually. And then am I at 5? I lost count. Should have been doing this on my fingers, huh? And then her fifth husband dies. So, in the 1700s, they never say when this is set, because it was set contemporary to when it was published, and I don't remember when it was published, but I'm pretty sure this was after the Fire of London, so 1666. I'm pretty sure this is in the 1700s. She spends time in Virginia. She goes to Ireland. She goes to Scotland. What I was trying to illustrate is that she bounces from husband to husband, but all of her bouncings are righteous, which is, I suppose, in a lot of ways. I'm so confused. I have so many thoughts. I really need to I need to do this every day and just get a backlog of these and then put them up on a schedule on YouTube instead of waiting until it itches and it's bursting to come out of me. And because I'm not really talking about Vindication, but I am talking about Vindication because she's vindicated at every act. I suppose is what I'm trying to say. That in every act of the story, she engages in what from the outside, or what from the Christian perspective of the 17th century or the 18th century would have said was an amoral, irreligious, even evil relationship. She engages in these anti-Christian relationships, and that's why I called it Arthurian in a lot of ways. But she is not an Arthurian lady, is the thing. Is she in a lot of ways is a Galahad, or I don't know if one of the knights... I don't know the knights' backstories as well as I should for someone who loves the stories as much as I do. You would think that like Gawain and Owen and all these guys, I would know all their different backstories, even though I've named one of my rats Gawain, and I love that name. Gawain is just such a great Welsh name. Great British name. Did it again. And so she's righteous and she's vindicated, just like an Arthurian knight. So the Arthurian knights, if you're familiar with the stories, the old stories became moralized by the Christian news stories, and they were like, oh, these men doing these good things for these women, and these women were paying them with sex, and then these people getting into what appear to be sexual marriages where the woman lives with the man and gives him sex because he provides her with food, shelter, and physical safety. Christianity moralized against that, and we talked briefly in the first episode about the definitions of marriage. And so marriage, it's interesting. Moll Flanders really makes you see, because again, because he doesn't explain how things are, how things were, and how things are changing. Daniel Defoe, through Moll Flanders, his first-person protagonist, main character, never explains how things were and how things are changing. He doesn't even explain how things are, because So, like, he doesn't explain the difference in a guinea and a shilling, or a farthing, or a penny, or none of that. None of that. He doesn't need to, because he's writing to... It would be like me explaining to you the difference in $1 and a quarter. The difference in £100... not £100, Jesus. $100 bill and $5 on Cash App, right? Like, I don't need to explain that to you. So if I'm writing a book that takes place now, I don't need to explain that to you. But if I'm reading a book in 100 years that takes place now, I have to explain all of those things to the audience, the buying power, etc. My point is that she, in a lot of ways, is a Galahad, because she frequently and fully admits that she has to engage in these sexual and romantic liaisons, and frequently calls them liaisons, these relationships with men, because if she doesn't, she's going to be raped and murdered, right? That's what's going to happen to her if she doesn't know a man. And it's interesting because he's moralizing that what she's doing is righteous to people who would say in her own time that what she's doing is unrighteous. And that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to say that. It's interesting to me. I don't really know how it fits into the vindication, but she is vindicated at every turn. So, like, even when she's a pickpocket and a street thief, all of her associates keep being arrested and executed, or at least deported. They call it transported to Ireland or to North America, to a colony in North America, which ended up, that's actually how her biological mother was able to live and have her biological brother in North America, was because she was transported instead of being executed, because she was pregnant with the main character. So she delivers, and then she's deported to a prison colony, and then the little girl was sent to a nunnery or whatever it turned out. I don't remember. I was having a hard time paying attention to the details at the beginning of the book, because he was doing a lot of quibbling about how the male author was doing a lot of breaking the fifth wall. Is that what it's called? Fourth wall? Breaking the fourth wall. Whichever wall. He was breaking the barrier between the audience and the creative work. He was frequently making it impossible for me to suspend my disbelief by reminding me that even though he was talking about lowly and sinful things and people, he wasn't a sinner, and that there was a moral message in here to be taken away, besides the page deep, or the paper deep ink, the ink deep message of being a prostitute and a poor person is a bad thing. And so in a lot of ways it speaks to me, right? Because I talk a lot about poverty and what poverty does to you, and I talk a lot about riches and what riches do to you, and I talk a lot about addiction, and I talk a lot about psychosexual drama, and that's what this is about. And I find that I personally have only ever encountered one author willing to talk about these things, in Neal Stephenson. And I believe that I've mentioned into this microphone that I've been recently revisiting Neal Stephenson's The Baroque Cycle, I believe is what the series is called. It culminates, I believe, in the System of the World. And I'm pretty sure that I talked about how I missed books in the middle. And so I really didn't understand what was going on. But I was fascinated and captivated, and my imagination was sparked forever. And it opened the door that allowed Rob to walk into my life, definitely into my mind and then into my life. And he makes a decision with his female character at the end that I didn't understand. But now, having read Moll Flanders and so recently to the Vagabond King, I realize a couple of things. First of all, Jack, the Vagabond King, is her first husband who runs away to France. Moll Flanders' first husband who runs away to France. All of the details in both books are identical. So that was an intentional nod to Daniel Defoe. Not nudge, nod, not a nudge, a nod. That was an intentional nod to Daniel Defoe. And he quotes Daniel Defoe's book about the Fire of London frequently throughout The Vagabond King. So obviously he's read him. And that's probably a hint that he quotes the Fire in London, is probably a hint that the Vagabond King is her first husband, and Jack is doing everything that he's doing to prove himself a good man to his first wife, even though he doesn't see her for like 20 years or whatever it is. He may never actually see her again in the series, but he might have run across her. But that doesn't matter because what Neal Stephenson is doing is a historical fiction. But his female main character is offered a Duchess position contingent on how do I want to put this without upsetting YouTube? Contingent on her being readily available for conjugal visits at the bequest of two people competing for the throne of England, and she acquiesces physically to both of them. And I didn't like that at first. And what I've been noticing, and this is about Vindication still, what I've been noticing is that I thought that having finished that and having got to about Moll Flanders' 30s, I had the thought that maybe men can't do women justice as authors. Maybe a man can't write a female character and do her justice because we're so different. And then I got to thinking about it because of the way that Daniel Defoe presents his female character and her opinions about being married to a man, and more specifically because of the way that he represents how men think about women in the time period. It's got me thinking a lot of things that are pre-verbal, but related to Vindication. So I think that I could argue out, but I don't want to, that feminism has at every step reacted to their victories with vindication, that by winning in court it proves the righteousness of their individual marriages or their individual struggles with being married, which is the behavior of a stupid person and an idiot cult. But that doesn't matter because Christianity did the same, and liberal feminism is aping the evolution of European Catholicism so closely. It's a one-to-one relationship. They're exactly the same. They're indistinguishable. Liberal feminism is medieval Catholicism. They're the same. The only difference is you just cut the sun out of the equation and worship not Mary Magdalene, but Mary the Virgin. And Mary Magdalene, actually, it's more about worshiping the Mary Magdalene that the Catholic Church invented. It's more about worshiping a whore goddess that never existed before the Catholic Church decided that Mary Magdalene was a whore. Around the same time that I'm talking about, 15, 16, 1700s, around that time is when Mary Magdalene became a whore, and the idea was to... am I not allowed to say that word? Should I use prostitute? The idea was that she had become through her psychosexual drama unclean in whatever way. And so feminism has raised the unclean woman up to the pedestal of the ultimate goddess, of the only representative figure worth recreating your image in. And that's called imitation, is what I was trying to say. The only goddess, the one god or the one goddess worth imitating. And so I was having a conversation about that the other day about Christianity, and I was wondering if via representation, Jesus wins every argument when it comes to morality and ethics, because this isn't what I want to talk about. I don't think that this is in Vindication, but it is. It is in Vindication because Jesus wins every argument. And so I've said that Christianity has taught feminism, and feminism has taught liberalism, and liberalism is the vindication that turns to ashes in your mouth. And so what I mean is, at every victory that Christianity got, they reacted to their opponents with vindication. And so that makes sense in the context of the 10th century, when your God was fighting their God quite literally, and if they burned down your village, their God quite literally was vindicated in the fight. So what I'm saying is that vindication is a normal human emotion. That 37 minutes in, what vindication as an emotion is the reward for a fight that is largely emotional and largely drawn out. So how do I want to show the difference in vindication? So I don't know what the emotion is, but when somebody attacks you, and it's in a neutral thing, and you're just competing, and it's just a neutral competition. Winning has its own satisfaction, the satisfaction of winning, but it's just the win. So like if you're playing like street basketball, you're just playing pickup basketball or whatever. Winning is winning. But if your whole life you've been told that you can't do something, and you determine to do it, thus doing it after having been told in an aggregate of time that you can't, the emotion of succeeding is vindication. It's, I knew I could do this, right? Or I knew I was right, right? And there's a warning there. There's a moralization, I guess, in the word vindication. I'd like to break it apart, but it seems like it's coming from the Vinny of I came. So it's probably psychosexual in nature, the etymology of that word. So I'm not gonna do that. But there's a warning that comes with Vindication, because it's like clapter for a comedian. I can remember Jon Stewart warning his contemporaries during the Bush administration about clapter. And so I'm going to talk about a different thing, and I'm not really sure exactly how they line up. So, you've been here for 40 minutes. Stay with me. Clapter is different from laughter by his definition, in that clapter is where you say something that's not a joke, but it is designed to make your audience clap in resonation with what you've said. Resonation, not resignation. So what you say resonates with them as a truth, and they clap to encourage you to continue speaking in that vein. Clapter is Vindication, right? So we would much rather have people tell us, you're right, you're so right, than just laugh in the case of a joke at what we've said. And holy shit, I'm talking about why I'm doing this. There's a difference. So with a thought, with a communication, with a conversation, with philosophy, what I don't want you doing is clapping and patting me on the back and saying, you're right, your thoughts are totally right. Now let's build an institution and make politicians change their minds and their behavior based on the way that you think. That's the opposite of what I want. First of all, I believe that I said last episode that great minds think for themselves and come to their conclusions independently. So the last thing that I want is for somebody to repeat my thoughts. Maybe what I want, if I want anything, is for someone to do what I do and say, my thinking was inspired when he, talking to myself gaming, said this. I would be into that. But I don't want to be quoted. Like, I'm not Ben Shapiro. I'm not Matt Walsh. Those guys are fucking douchebags for how much they want the fame and the clapter. You can see it on Matt Walsh's face anytime he says something rude to an audience of people and somebody claps. He gets this, yeah, I'm the coolest kid in the room. Of course you're the coolest kid in the room. You're the only one who's allowed to talk. But that's Vindication, and that's chasing Vindication. Is standing up in front of rooms of people and saying things that you know that half of them are going to want to hear and half of them are not going to want to hear. Half of them are going to like hearing and half of them are going to dislike hearing. Standing up in front of a room like Jordan Peterson, or I'm trying to think of another one of these conservative talking heads, these demagogues who stand up in front of rooms and say things that half of the room are already going to agree with and the other half of the room already disagree with. I have no interest in that. I would much rather talk to you about things that you already know and don't know enough about to have an opinion, so you'd like to listen, or I would really hope to find things that you didn't know that you knew nothing about and just want to listen. Because there's an active listening. There's engaging in listening that we no longer do. I talked about sophistry, and I talked about communication, and I talked about logic and mathematics. That video has done the best of all of my videos. And so in a lot of ways, I'm trying to do what all of the people that do what I do, including news anchors like, what's his name? The British one that everybody hates that was on CNN forever and ever and ever. He gave really good advice to Jordan Peterson. In fact, to not try to recreate your success, to just keep doing what you're doing, and success will follow. But I think that he might also be wrong in a lot of ways. In that way that Daniel Thrasher said that you do what feels right to you, but in a way that other people say you're objectively good at. I think that those are kind of the yin and the yang of that advice. Is that you at all times want to occupy a third way. You don't want to occupy someone else's way. And that to me is twofold. There are twofold reasons for that. The first is my father And it always comes back to my father in these cases, but my father told me as a little boy that as a man, you have 3 choices. It all comes down to 3 choices. You can either lead, you can follow, or you can get the fuck out of the way. Get the fuck out of the way. And what that means is that there's a third way. There's your way. There's the way that you're not in anyone's way, and you're not following anyone, because there's a fourth to that. And it's to explore, because a leader has people who are already behind him, who have chosen him as leader. If you're leading people and you have appointed yourself leader, or you have been appointed by someone else that wasn't chosen to be leader, you are not a leader. You are a tyrant. Those are different things. That's why in my workplaces as manager, I could never get anyone to agree that I was leader, because I was always hired from outside. And even if everyone that was there before you is replaced, and I was never involved in that replacer, I just worked in gas stations and fast food where that replacer happens on its own. Even if you're replaced, if you didn't come up and you weren't promoted up, no one will ever respect you. But corporations don't understand that, because corporations, they are used to the replacer and the turnover. That's why now they just say nobody wants to work, because they've come to the conclusion that creating a working environment that doesn't encourage people to come to it means they don't want to do labor. And it's like, no, I want to work. I just don't want to do work in your environment, because you're going to hire outside managers. You're not going to promote from within. And the people that are hired from without think of themselves as leaders, which makes me think of an Opeth line where he says, oh dang, what does he say? I can remember the second half. But it's, and you pity my conviction, whereas I thought of myself as a leader. And that's really what it's like to work in these places that say that people don't want to work. These entry-level jobs, fast food, any sort of food service, any sort of service, retail, all of these gigs, they that thing that I just said, they pity the conviction of the people who actually buy into the team. So if you actually buy into what so in my case a gas station, if you actually buy into the gas station's financial goals, their revenue goals for the month, they pity you. They just think you're stupid. Like, why do I care about making this company money? And why do they care about making that company money? I could never, in 15 years, I could never get anyone to care. I could never explain to them why they should care. Now, why you should care is obvious. I don't know really what it has to do, why you should care. I don't know why you should care about the prosperity of your employer has to do with what we're talking about when we're talking about vindication. But I can think of a time that I was vindicated by an employer firing me, and that was when they went out of business shortly thereafter, for all of the reasons that they fired me, because I thought of myself as a leader. And so I was vocal about, no, these things are going to lose you money, and they're going to get this business. This business is going to run out of money because of these decisions that you're making. And so I was vindicated in that. They did ultimately run out of money and close their doors. But that tastes like ashes to me. I'm not happy. I'm not happy for them that they ran out of money. First of all, even though I wasn't friends with, and I couldn't personally like any of the people that I worked with, I'm never happy to see anybody unemployed. You're never happy to see somebody not making an income. Even people that have okay, so in Moll Flanders, she's talking about how she has enough money, long before she stops being a thief. And this is what I'm talking about, is I don't ever take joy in seeing people out of work, even if they've got enough money to support themselves, because work is what keeps us sane. The Germans figured that out hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago, that it's work. It's that daily grind that keeps us alive and keeps us sane, right? And so I never like to see somebody fired. I never like to see somebody's business close. I never like to see somebody out of work, even if they're bad people, because it's only through work, and by work I mean the definition that's used in physics, that is effort or energy divided by time, energy over time, quite literally. It's only through work that we get better. And so it's only with feedback, and it's only with critique, and it's only with effort that we improve. And so what does that have to do with vindication? Well, vindication is the emotion that causes you to stop improving. Yeah. That's the warning of vindication. Vindication is the feeling like, okay, well, I don't have to get better anymore. I don't have to work at this anymore. I have won and it is over. So the women's soccer team declared that, in their hearts, I believe this to be true, that they had won, and therefore they would continue to win because they had been winning. And see, now, I'm not just saying that as a person observing from the outside. I grew up playing sports. And, in fact, forgot to actually plug in my computer before doing this. Anyway, my first teams, I would say maybe my first 4, I think, years playing football in Pee Wee, I was actually a part of the second best team in our league. And what I mean by that is that the 3 years that I can remember, we played and lost in the championship. That's how I remember it. I didn't care about the stakes. I didn't care about the team. I cared about going out there and making somebody hurt as badly as I was hurt by my family. Because I was allowed to. But that's not important. What's important, and what I remember, is that we were always the second best because we believed that we would win. Because we usually went undefeated, we just believed that we would continue to go undefeated. And so I remember this is a different team, different city, different people fundamentally, but I remember the same thing happened between 7th and 8th grade. Now see, in 6th grade, I didn't play on a good team. I didn't play on that same team. I actually played on a shit team that only won one game. And so it's a different story, but it's the same kind of thing. I felt vindicated after that one because I'd been telling my team, even in 6th grade, I thought of myself as a leader. I had been telling them that we could win if we just kept our heads in the game every play, every game, and just kept fighting even when we got behind. And that's actually how we won our one game, is we got behind, and I kept telling them, we got to fight, we got to fight, we got to fight. We can't lose this game. And now it does help that the other team that we were playing hadn't won a game. But that's why I was saying it. We can't lose this game. They're as bad as we are. We can't be the worst. We can win this. We have to, and we did. And that is not what happened for my team in 8th grade. I remember in 8th grade, we thought that we were going... In 8th grade, because we had been undefeated in 7th grade, we thought we were going to go undefeated, and we ended up being one game out of the playoffs because we just showed up like shit in all of our home games. Just showed up like absolute shit for all of our home games. Like, we thought we were just going to win because we had. And that makes me think of the Cowboys in general. It makes me think of the Miami Dolphins, who are the team that I followed most closely the last 15 years. And that's how both of those teams always are. I always say that the Dolphins and the Cowboys are, they're linked. They're quantum linked like two particles in quantum entanglement. They're entangled like two quantum particles. But what the one does, the other does. They're constantly imitating one another, and they always have the same narrative at the end of the year. In my lifetime, and my lifetime begins with the most recent Cowboys Super Bowl victory. So it's only true after that Cowboys Steelers Super Bowl. So it's not true in the aggregate of time. Only in the recency of my bias, or the bias of my recency, or something like that. Who knows? But that's still vindication, right? I was telling them, we're going to lose this game, we're going to lose this game, we're going to lose this game, we're not going to get in the playoffs, it's going to go badly because you guys aren't keeping your head in the game, because you're not playing hard, because you knew how many games we won last year. Also, I wasn't a starter on that team, so I wasn't a leader, so I was saying these things in my head and not to anybody else, but I felt vindicated. I remember laughing and feeling a deep sense of joy when we lost the game that eliminated us from the playoffs. Now, we won every game after that in big fashion, just like the Dolphins have done the last... That's actually not what the Dolphins have done. The Dolphins have waited to get themselves eliminated from playoff contention in weeks 15 and 16. But anyway, they made the playoffs last year, so that didn't happen. And when there was the 17-week thing. So not all patterns hold forever, is what I'm trying to say. And so I'm trying to talk about change. I was trying to talk a little bit about change, and about choosing to change, and about how you can't change somebody's mind for them. I've talked about that, and about how if you want... I began to talk about how if you want to change somebody's mind, you have to... There are steps that you have to go through, You're not really changing their mind. They have to change their mind for you in a certain amount, in a certain way. I think what I'm talking about and where I'm segueing to is manufactured vindication. Because that's what I see on the internet. I see a lot of manufactured vindication in our civilization. And so what that means is that a lot of the foundation of our civilization, it remains vindication. And I said that. Christianity and the way that Christianity reacted to its foes or handled its victories was vindication. And so we're all imitating that all the time. And I'm thinking about the whole Barbenheimer thing, where either side was vindicated that the other side blank, right? Or the people who try to say like, this thing, like, people just make up facts, to be vindicated so that they can be vindicated in video for their fans. We feed on vindication. It's a kind of vicarious living that we vicariously participate in other people's vindication. Which is how you can have cults of vindication in the guys, I can't remember the name of the YouTube channel, the collective, but the guys like Jordan Peterson, Matt Walsh, I've said their names a lot, but those guys, why can't I remember the name of that channel? I've said it so many times on mine, you'd think it would be right at the tip of my lips, but I haven't seen it, and I haven't watched any of their material in about a month, and I can tell you I'm happier. I'm a lot happier not soaking myself and not living vicariously through other people's vindication. That has been an improvement of my life. Not trying to feel vindication is something that has improved my overall daily vibe, outlook, right? Because I keep saying it, I keep going back over it, like there's really not much to say on these topics. That's why works of philosophy just define them and then move on, I'm finding. Because there's, like, virtue, there's nothing to say. So, like, Plato, the reason that he has to have people speak wrongly about it, the reason that dialectic is necessary to Plato is because there's nothing to say. The only things to say are what's actually true, what's actually right, and then what's wrong, and then to have nothing to say, right? And so that goes back to my third way. You want a third way. I want a third way. I think that you want, and that I mean lack want means lack, not I don't mean want to desire. I mean you lack a third way, and that's where our anxiety, and that's where all this, that's why we're watching video games. That's why you're looking for videos of people playing video games, and why you're ultimately listening to me talk, is because of that thing that I just said. What was it? You want a third way. You want your own way. You want a cult to join, but you want it to be your cult, right? I don't think most people want to be leaders. I think that leaders are thrust into the position. I think that it's a skill set that you have, and that a good leader accepts the job. A good leader doesn't seek it out. I don't think that most people desire to be followers. I think that people are followers because they are followers, and I don't think that people necessarily want to get out of the way. I think that by and large people like the society of other people, and they like cult, and they like to belong to something. So I think my father's rules, while great rules, I think that other people reject them. I think that the vast majority, especially of poor people, just, and by poor people I mean yeomen, I mean people below the level of the rich decision makers, I think they reject this idea that you either have to lead, follow, or get out of the way. I think that most people don't realize that they are a vehicle moving on a road in time and space, and that's what the narrative of their life is the vehicle moving through time and space, often on a road, and on a paved road. And I genuinely do not think that feminism understands that things were built before their lifetimes. I know that liberalism wants to pretend that things weren't built before their lifetimes and that nothing happened before our lives. But that's also a millennial thing. Like, that's a thing for people born after the year 1980. For whatever reason, we reject things from before 1980, or we hyper-fixate on things from before the contemporary time. Very strange. Millennials were the PTSD that made millennials. I don't know if we're unique among history's generations, but we're certainly fucked. We are certainly fucked. Like, even the millennial stereotype of rejecting being a millennial and pretending to be a Gen X, or pretending to be somewhere between the Gen X's, the whole, what do they call it? Geriatric millennial. Like, you would rather adopt the name geriatric than just be a millennial. But that goes to what I'm talking about, because the vindication, the fear, the rejection of the millennial identity, and in fact the embrasure of the millennial and post-millennial tags and all that comes with them, the stereotypes and the hurtful commentary from the older generations, is a sort of vindication, because the older generation, the Gen X, and especially the baby boomers, the boomer generation, they feel vindicated. It's strange to say, but they feel vindicated in seeing their grandchildren and their children be fuck-ups, because they were fuck-ups, and they were told by their parents that they were going to be fuck-ups and that they were going to ruin civilization. That is, the boomers and the Gen X were told that by the greatest generation, those people who fought and survived World Wars I and II. And they were told by their parents that they were fuck-ups. They were told by their parents and their grandparents that their liberal arts degrees and their hippie woo-woo bullshit worldview was a fuck-up, and that they weren't going to amount to anything. And so creating a world where Gen X, millennials, and the generations to follow can't be anything but fuck-ups was the goal, and they feel vindicated in it. That's why they make fun of us for our stereotypical avocado toast. And it's like, we consume the avocado toast in a sort of vindication that we have something that's unique to us from our grandparents and our parents. And in a lot of ways, that's why we're woke. And that's why we claim to be woke, is out of a vindication that we believe we know more about the world than our parents, because our parents and grandparents abandoned us to the world. And so in that way, we all think of ourselves not as leaders, but as Lewis and Clark style explorers of a new continent, right? This whole new universe of the post-internet world, and now the post-social media world. And now we're entitled to think that we're explorers on the same level of abstraction and the same hierarchy of importance as people like Neil Armstrong, Christopher Columbus. And this is why we're rejecting them. It wasn't Gen X and it wasn't the boomers who rejected the world's explorers. It was us, millennials. And the reason that millennials, my generation, I did it for a time, not knowing what I was doing, like that song. Some people started singing it not knowing what it was, and now they're forever singing it, or now they're singing it forever just because this is the song that never ends. This is the song that never ends. We reject these explorers of the past, and we tell one another that we're rejecting them because they were bad people, because they did bad things. They were, in a phrase, genocidal fuckheads, and for that, they should be forgotten. But that's not the real reason that the people rejecting them want you to forget them. If you forget them and then they claim to be them, you won't know any different. You won't know to tell them they're wrong. That's the whole liberal worldview. The whole point is to keep you exactly like Christianity. The point is to keep you so ignorant that you won't know when your leaders are wrong. That's the whole point. This whole democratic presidency of the United States is about keeping you so ignorant of what's going on that you won't know when they make fucking stupid choices. And that's what they do. That's all they do. The Democrats haven't made a good choice in the last 4 years. And now, because they haven't made a good choice in the last 4 years and the election's coming up and they know they're going to lose it, they're trying to put the candidate that's actually going to win the presidency for the next 4 years in prison. It's so hilariously politics. The politics are so hilariously contemporary to this point in time, this period in history that I'm studying and have so little interest in. And I think the reason I have so little interest in it is for the same reasons that I had no interest in colonial and post-revolution, Civil War and post-Civil War, World War I and post-World War II American history and American politics, is because it's so surface level obvious what's going on, and the voting populace, the people, the yeomen, the people who should actually be in charge, they're too stupid to know that their leaders are mentally retarded. It's amazing, and it's depressing, and it's frustrating. But it's also something that I've come to the conclusion that it's actually preferable this way. Because if we lived in a time, like if we lived in the 1890s and we're going through the things that we're going through now, our leaders would have opinions about how to fix them. And that leads to vindication. Because if it seems like it's working, then you get vindicated and then you stop doing the fix. And I mean, I feel like I've talked about that multiple times, about how that's what politics is. And that's the liberal politics right now is running on the high of feeling vindicated that gay marriage worked. And gay marriage working is a question. Because when marriage works, divorce doesn't happen. And gays divorce at an equally, if not higher rate than heteros. So let's maybe reserve judgment for whether that worked or not. And that's sort of what I'm thinking about with vindication, is that vindication doesn't reserve judgment. Vindication is a prejudice. And by that I mean it's a prejudgment, right? It's a pre-adjudication. So what that means is it means that you've decided before the outcome was determined how you were going to feel and how you were going to react. So vindication is sort of like, is the plan to celebrate after you win. So once we win, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And vindication in a lot of ways is the spiteful, even hurtful victory lap. Because spiteful is meanness that reflects poorly on and does indeed do harm to the self. That's why they say cut off the nose to spite the face, which is a historical event. That's a thing that women would do. And the context of their village or their home being conquered by a man with a sword, oftentimes the fear of the psychosexual drama to come would result in the nose being hacked off. And I know that I've already used the R word, and so I've already thrown it out there. But this isn't a place where you expect to be. If that's a word that triggers you, this is not a place that you would expect to be hearing that word. And so I appreciate that. I want to keep psychosexual drama and the specifics, especially the uglier words, to a minimum. So I apologize for that if it's needed to anyone out there. So now that I'm crossing, I have crossed the hour mark. Now that I'm at the hour 10 mark, I should say, I need to be working toward wrapping up, and wrapping up is not right. I need to be working toward giving you a takeaway, because we've been in here and I've been waffling, and I've broached upon a bunch of different subjects that I don't remember, so I can't circle back to them, and I need to be working toward a building takeaway or a working model of what it looks like to not vindicate. And I suppose that's where an etymology will be helpful. So I should do that. I should look up the etymology of the word vindication. So vindicate, quote, has been used in English since at least the mid-16th century. That's interesting that it comes from the same time period that I'm currently obsessed with. It comes from a form of the Latin verb vindicare, meaning to set free, avenge, or lay claim to. Yeah, look at that. Set free, avenge, or lay claim to. Those are about the only three behaviors that we do as Americans, especially when we're in the political, when we're wearing our political representative or ritual clothing. So when we're trying to represent ourselves as an educated person, we vindicate. We either liberate, take ownership of, or conquer. Wasn't that the third word? Claim, avenge was the third word. We either set a slave free, we avenge a wrongdoing to ourselves or someone else, or we conquer ourselves or someone else. We live in a constant state of seeking, finding, and seeking out vindication. Not as leaders, not as followers, and not out of the way. We do it as explorers. We do it as Batmans in the night of the day, seeking out to avenge ourselves on some wrong, or to set free some wronged person, oftentimes ourselves, right? I mean, you can even think of Tinder as the vindication of setting free your dick from your pants, right? Vindication is the opposite of learning, I think, maybe, is what I'm trying to say. Because vindication is that song by that guy that wore the hats and Sinatra. I don't know why the hats is how I get to Sinatra, but my mnemonics are my own. Post-concussion syndrome be damned. What was I talking about, Sinatra? Oh, that song, I Did It My Way, right? And I did it my way, right? That whole thing. That song is about the vindication of finding a third path, right? And I don't know. I don't know if what I'm doing is warning myself that I'm setting myself up for the most massive possible fall. Massive. If I'm so... wow, my Midwest and my Southern accents really fought over that word, didn't they? I sounded like the mom from Bobby's World. Don't you know? I made myself giggle. What the hell was I talking about? Oh my god. I don't know if I'm warning myself against vindication or I'm telling myself that I need to be like other people and I need to Batman up. Because what I've noticed, and I write about this a lot, I've probably talked about it a lot, I found Buddhism, I did all the Buddhist things, I did the thing all the philosophers say, I modeled my life out of after the core of the religion, and I sought meaning, and I have come to some conclusions. The way other people do things is maybe a better way of doing things. That maybe the reason that we don't all live a religious life and that maybe we're not all Buddhist and maybe we're not all good Christians and maybe the reason that Jesus told us, yeah, you're a sinner is because there's no life without mistakes. And so vindication is how you... There are two ways, I suppose, to move on from a moment. And this is something that I've been trying to figure out. And so maybe, I know that I'm thinking about Rob a lot. I want to write. I want to be writing and I want to be recording Rob. This has given me a lot of... Maybe what doing this does is vindicate me that I'm not too stupid to be participating in the same realm as Jordan's Peterson or Matt's Walsh. And that's I don't need to do that in this space, but I also do in a lot of ways because I'm undiagnosed, but I'm probably autistic because I remind myself frequently that I can do things that I know that I can do, or I have to constantly give myself positive affirmation. And a lot of that is I don't get positive affirmation. So like, you know, I don't have comments even on this YouTube channel saying like, "Oh wow, you're good at Brotato. Watching you play Brotato is fun," or anything like that. I don't, or like, "Yo, you're smart." You know, I don't get positive affirmation, and so I have to give it to myself. And that's another interesting thing. In talking about the context of when does a child stop needing the parent is like, when does the parent's role stop being to give the child undeserved, maybe unconditional positive affirmation, because positive affirmation isn't love, but in a lot of ways, like in English, we don't have a verb for what positive affirmation is. And so if you're going to positively affirm somebody, if you're going to do it in one word, that's to love them, right? Because love is the willingness to be ignorant or to ignore, to be ignorant of or to ignore the things in the person who is to you beloved that you wouldn't be able to ignore or tolerate in other people. And so like I'm often reminded by people in my acquaintance that in Japanese, according to their story, there's no I love you, there's no verb to love, like in English, that the closest phrase that they have is as you are tolerable to me. And so whether that's true of their language or not, as much as I love language, I have not ventured very east of India, because Chinese, Korean, and Japanese, to say nothing of the other language variants in Asia, are so very different than English, and English is pretty different than a lot of the other Indo-European languages. So I have a good excuse, even if it's not a good reason. Yeah, love is tolerance, right? Love is tolerance, and you build a tolerance through exposure, right? And so you fall in love with someone. you're like, oh, that person is so pleasant to me and I like them so much. I love them, right? It's that certain kind of adoration. That's what falling in love is. But to sustain a love or to love someone over the aggregate of like 30 years is really to tolerate their farts. That's why Peter in Family Guy, wow, 2 Family Guy references. I must have seen a Family Guy clip that I'm thinking about Family Guy so much today. But that's why Family Guy, and I think it was the 4th season, I don't remember, I'm not a huge fan, when he's teaching Meg how to be a good girlfriend, locks all the windows in the car and rips the nastiest fart imaginable and shouts at her to love my stink. Love my stink! Right? Because that's what it is to be a wife to a husband, is you have to tolerate and even learn to like the things about them which stink, right? So to love being a tanner, you can't hate the stink, can't hate the smell. If you love being a tanner, you can't hate the smell. Those 2 things are antithetical, right? In some way, you find the stink endearing, even if it's intolerable. Well, it has to be tolerable to you, right? These are words we don't use anymore. Tolerable, intolerable, right? I find this tolerable, right? The way that we use tolerance is in the context of drugs, right? So we say, oh, my tolerance to weed or to alcohol has gotten such that I no longer get high or drunk, right? Or I have a low tolerance for pain. But those things are not the same, right? They're not really the same. Those are more of a threshold. Those are more of a sliding scale. They're like your tolerance for pain isn't actually how well you feel it. It's how long you're willing to feel it before giving in to the pain response, right? So having a high tolerance for pain doesn't mean that you don't feel it. It's not like a tolerance is more like it's more like a damn. And see, and then you get into, I said a tolerance, and I heard myself, I immediately thought of manufacturing, being in machine shops, and the tolerance is that's how much wiggle room you have in your measurements. The tolerance of your measurements is how much wiggle room. If you're in tolerance, you're maybe not exact, but you're precise enough to be accurate. And if you're out of tolerance, you're so imprecise, you're no longer accurate. And I recently learned the manufacturing terms, precise and accurate, so I used them correctly for you there. You can use your context, your what do they say, context clues to parse them out for yourself if you care. But yeah, having a tolerance for someone is kind of like moving the goalposts. It's like a callus on your foot, right? It's not a willingness to. It's not a numbness. It's a willingness to be ignorant. Which is, in our language, is such a cruel thing to say, but it's not cruel. It's kind of beautiful. But in saying that is kind of ironic and funny in its own right, because to be beautiful is to be manly, right? Beau is boy, right? In French, beau means a dude. And so to be boaty is like being a boy. That's like boyness. So like to be full of boyness is what beautiful is. And so like cruelty in a way is boyness. Like to be a boy. I remember when girls just thought boys were cruel in general, that to be cruel and to say the hard thing was a boy. So like from that way of thinking, like to say the hard thing, the thing that people don't want to hear, is beauty. That is beautiful. And it used to be the pinnacle of masculinity was to say the thing, to do the thing, right? To be anyone less than a forthright person was to not be a man. But see, we in opening the door, throwing open the doors of man and woman have really confused what those words mean, because only a very narrow group of people were men and women, or lords and ladies, as it was. Most people were just people. And so, like, man and woman in the common tongue and the way that we use them really just mean male and female, but they're platonic ideals. Like, they're a category of being which has its own ritual clothing, which is representative of a category of being. And so, like, our whole argument right now with the whole trans thing of the binary, it's only man, it's only woman, like that has never been historically the case until the 21st century. That became the conversation in the case. Even in the 1800s, when German scientists became extremely interested in doing genital what do they call it when you get an arm or a kidney transplant? Yeah, there we go. They were very interested in attempting genital transplants in the 1800s, and in fact tried. There were people in Germany. There was a Nazi, I believe, that actually had a uterus and eggs implanted or transplanted into their body. That went necrotic, and they died of that. But it was attempted, and they were interested in it. They were motivated to make it happen in the 1800s. So this is not new by any stretch of the imagination. What's going on? What is going on is the deliberate confusion of the language and what the words mean. Because, again, in Germany, the language is a little bit different vis-a-vis the genders and the pronouns. And so this introduction of the whole, like, third gender, or I know I've talked about all of this before, and I basically I told you to ignore all of it, but it's vindication. See, it's a form of vindication. Is why we are where we are, and why we're in this sort of don't ask, don't tell situation vis-a-vis somebody's gender or somebody's sexual identity. Is a vindication that representation as such has won, right? That your representative identity is more real or more more important than your substantive or actual identity. And the vindication is where we're at now. And so vindication is I'm still trying to give a lesson on why not to do it, but I think that what all of these lessons are teaching me is that you have to use your instinctual drive toward vindication. It has to be aimed and targeted, and it has to be a religious. And so, yeah, that makes sense. And so, because what I'm really thinking about when I think about vindication in the context of the triune definition of avenging, claiming, or freeing, which are the only three reasons that you can have a war, are to claim someone else's land, to free someone else from bondage, or I keep forgetting them. To avenge someone who has been bonded, basically, who has been done a wrong. Those are the only three reasons you really go to war. And so vindication then becomes almost the fire. Vindication is almost the ignis fire. It's almost the original religion. And so what it has me thinking about is Vikings, right? It has me thinking about the Viking and the early knight, the early knight of Arthur, not what knights actually were when Knigget was a position in the king's government, but rather the warrior class that were called Viking or Viking in the Norse, and that I've talked about in other episodes. That tradition was participated in Britain and the north of France. And so I'm thinking about those dudes. Those dudes were vindicators. That's what they were doing, was vindicating. They were I'm thinking about, and I started to talk about Moll Flanders as a sort of vindicating, as a sort of Galahad story, and I'm thinking of her as a sort of vindication for 17th century or maybe 18th century if it was in the 1700s. Women, I should look that up. I'm going to do that right now, actually. 1722, so the 18th century, the 1700s. Damn it, now I forgot what I was... Right, so if Moll Flanders in 1722 is a sort of Galahad story, that means that in her own way, she's going out a-questing. She's doing the Arthurian knight thing. That means that she's doing the Viking thing. And so what that means is she at various points in the story is defending bridges. She's accosting people on bridges. She's protecting virgin women, and she's assaulting castles in a warlike manner to claim their goods, and she does that. She actually breaks into several homes and steals their things as a cut purse. And so that means that vindication needs to be the Kamehameha that forms the wave, which is, Goku's superpower, right? So vindication is what gives Spider-Man his Spider-Man-ness, right? Being vindicated that his science nerd, wasn't bad, and actually turns out to make him the coolest. And Harry Potter is vindicated that he wasn't really the closet boy, right? Or the basement dweller. He's actually the chosen one, right? All of this, it's about vindication. Everything is about vindication. And I don't know how, because I know it wasn't for me, I don't think anyone thinks of it as a surface level thing. I think that it's a human, and it's most certainly an American first cause. I got stuck on the Latin. What's that called? Prima something. And alchemy. Damn, I was almost cool and used a really neat esoteric magic thing there. Like I think I'm fucking Manly P. Hall or something. Fuck me. What is it? Prima something. Materia. Prima materia. That's the word I was looking for. The prime matter. The first thing. The first cause. The prime matter is actually not the first cause. The first cause is the causeless cause, and that's God. But I'm thinking in terms now of ascension and vindication, and where vindication fits into the ascension, into the hierarchy of psychological being. And I guess that brings us back to Kamehameha wave. It brings you back to the spirit bomb. And if you're not versed in Dragon Ball Z, it's a meditative energy that you grow until you can manifest it. And then in the case of is that called, are Dragon Ball Z, is that called Budokai? Was that what the genre is called? Or is that just one of the games? Or is Dragon Ball Z also a shonen? Is Dragon Ball Z in Shonen Jump? Probably not, huh? God damn, what am I talking about? Oh, it's an energy. It's a will in the context of the magic that we've already talked about in Magick, the kind with a K. It's a will that you're then able to manifest into. I'm thinking about like if you were able to sit in a dark space and imagine a point of light and then grow that point of light into a ball, and then that ball of light into like a bowling ball, and then you were able to throw that bowling ball at somebody. That's kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about vindication. And so vindication is not different from hope in a lot of ways. I think vindication might be the result of hope. And so hope is sort of like desire. Hope is sort of like a wish, right? And so hope is a will, and vindication is the feeling of your will having been culminated. And to vindicate, or the act of vindication, is the culminating of the will, because The will maybe has more than 3 expressions, but the will most certainly wants to have what it wants to have. It wants to avenge itself when it has been wronged, and it most certainly wants to what did I say they were? They were claim. I need to write these down where I can fucking see them. I have to practice this. I'd never seen the definition before. Claim, avenge, and set free. And those are, there are probably other emotions. There are probably other things that you hope for. But when you're hoping, when you're in a hopeless situation or a hopeless place like that Rihanna song, when you're hopeless, you have no will. You have nothing more than the vain wish to either avenge yourself, set yourself free, or to overcome your trial. But hope and will are different, obviously, not just because they have different words, but will is sort of like the pre-planning phase, and it's the energy source that sustains the planning and post-planning phases. So will is sort of like the through line. Will is like I think I've said this, will is like the fire. Will is like the ignis fire. Will is like the fire that heats the kiln, that makes the pottery. Right? And then so the pottery are an expression of your will. And so your deeds, your what you've done, what you make, where you are, what your life looks like, how you talk, everything else, everything about you, everything is an expression of your will when you are a willful person. But when you're a passive person, you're hopeful. And so, like, again, Moll Flanders, recency bias, if you're a single woman, or you're one of these women that do the feminist thing where they talk shit about men on YouTube and TikTok for likes, among other women who have been mistreated by a single man or have put themselves repeatedly in position to be mistreated by men as a class. She talks about being passive early and then late in her life, related to men. So like being passive in the hunt to get a husband, and then being passive in the need to have an income after she had reached menopause age, or however you want to say that, if she had passed childbearing. It may be unrelated to what I'm thinking about, but she talks about how the childbearing is actually what's valuable to the men, even more than her being attractive and even more than her being able to manage their estates. Because that's the thing that I kept waiting for Moll to get good at, was business on her own right. And she has this 500 pound sum of money that stays 500 pounds. It goes down, but it doesn't climb above 500 pounds up to the point that I'm at in the book, where she's like 54. And I keep waiting on her to get acumen of some sort. But her acumen is for whatever thing she needs to do to survive in the moment. And that's actually kind of prescient, it's not just interesting to the story, because like if I'm attacking this like a modern person and I'm saying, oh, character development, oh, story arcs, and I'm trying to read it like a liberal. I'm trying to read it with the malicious non-compliance of assigned reading, right? Or I'm trying to read it imagining myself manifesting the envy of having never done anything, which is what so many online reviewers and critiquers, like, I don't remember his name. I bailed on his channel so hard, but there's a guy who does critique of movies, and I can see what his thumbnails look like, and he reminds me of Shadiversity, and Shadiversity is the same way, where these pseudo-intellectuals who just have a broad envy of every other intellectual, and so their work or their produce is just envy. It's just green, right? And that's the Grinch, right? And you can see it in how they present themselves. And that guy that I brought up, that wasn't Shadiversity that I brought up first, he actually, the video before I bailed on him, he actually apologized for being that person in his first, and that he was reading the work of somebody else, and so he was going to be that person instead of themselves in their channel. And that's actually why I bailed, was because they started being that other person and just quoting from that other book instead of having opinions. And so this is why I try not to source my opinions to things. Like I said, I want you to do. I don't want you to source me if you find me, which is interesting, because I'm an hour 40 in. I've talked a little bit about what this podcast is and what I'm doing. I've talked a little bit about my source material, and I've talked a lot about nothing. But moving forward, like, it's going to be difficult for me. It's going to be difficult for me to be famous doing this, because like the way that people like me, or like what I appear to be doing, like the Matts Walsh and Jordan Petersons of the world, we need to be able to say these things in short bursts, and so we need to be able to say like a minute that you can then clip off in a short and share to your friends and quote and like, and I don't want that. I am so reticent of that, because I want you to rephrase it. I want you to take what I've said and say, well, it works better for me if it's said in this way, and then to manifest it in that way. I want you working on your own will. I don't want you following mine, right? And I don't want you participating in mine. And I most certainly don't want you to realize 10 years down the road of following me that you've been a battery to power my will, so I don't have to think about it. And that's the opposite of what I want, because what this is about is talking so I don't have to think about it. It's talking about my will, and not even my will, talking about my thoughts so that my will can express itself through them. And vindication, I'm leery to feel vindicated. I'm leery to look at the 500 views or whatever it is on what did I call that one? Is that the one that I called is that representation in the mathematics of being? Or is representation just called representation? Anyway, I want to feel vindicated, like, oh, look at that, 500 people clicked, it had a good title and a terrible thumbnail, but and I've had multiple tens of hours of cumulative views, and I should feel vindicated in that, but I don't feel vindicated in that. What I feel is challenged by that, right? It's like, oh, if people are listening, that means I have to continue to get better, and vindication is when the channel stops. So vindication is when your favorite YouTube channel gets that silver or platinum plaque and then starts crowdsourcing or farming the community for ideas of what to publish. And I know that I asked what I should play, but that was more of a recommendation of what I should actually play. What's good out there? I don't know. All the games that... And so here we're talking about it again, the future of the podcast. And I think that I know what's popular is 20-minute videos, and so I think that what I'm going to do, because a lot of the games that I've tried to record that aren't Brotato to pair with my voice, I fucking hate. I just fucking hate them so much. And so I think I'm just going to have to do a hate play, because I think I might be entertaining in 20-minute bits, hate playing these games and raging my way through how much I fucking hate the every design choice that they've made. And that hating design choices is what we want from our creators. That's what I want from my creators. I want them to go, oh, I hated this design choice, so I'm going to fix it. And that's ultimately what my critique, that's what my complaint with, I fucking hate Black Skylands. Oh my God, I fucking hate it so much. Anyway, that's what my complaint is it's like, oh, you took these other games that you liked and you mashed them together and you didn't do anything new with them. In fact, you fucked up the things that you liked. And I would much rather, so for instance, if somebody was going to offer to let me make a JRPG, I would much rather take what I fucking hated about their last game and fix it than try to make a new game. Right? A new IP. Or I would much rather be given the freedom to fix, and this is in air quotes, make a new IP that's fixing what I don't like, not homaging what I did. Because homages are never as good as the original. That's why homages are a line in the book or in the movie. They're not the whole movie. That's why nobody likes remakes. Because the remake isn't an homage. They want an homage to the original. They want you to remind them of how good the original was and then to fix what was broken. Not to break it anew out of the hubris of your own ability to reinterpret the movie. Because what the audience knows is that you're not reinterpreting the movie. You're remaking it. You're reimagining it like the original never happened. Yeah, I absolutely understand why people were pissed about The Little Mermaid. It's not the skin color. They don't care about the skin color. The skin color you can rationalize. Fuck, we rationalized men playing women's roles for thousands of years. We understand acting. We understand play acting. We understand what a movie is. We understand make-believe, motherfuckers. See, and this is why I have no respect for the writers and their strike, is that they have no respect for their audience. They think that their audience doesn't understand what they're doing. And it's like, no. We're not mad at you because you think we're racist and because you put us in a position to be racist. We're not mad at you because we're racist and you did a racist thing because, yeah, it's actually the people who race shift the thing for the creativity thinking that the audience won't notice who are being racist, by the way. They're the ones who are doing the bad race thing. They're the ones with the racist worldview. They are the hurtful people. And they are being hurtful because they're trying to brownwash. Brownwash is exactly the same as whitewashing. It's just brown. It's just a different color. It's the same behavior. It's the same bad behavior. Doing the same bad behavior, like my granddad always used to say, 2 wrongs don't make a fucking right. Right? 2 left turns don't make a right. You have to make the 3rd left turn. You have to make the correction in order to get it right. So 2 wrongs just make 2 wrongs. It's not until you get the person who comes in and fixes it, who corrects the bad behavior. And I guess, as I'm talking about vindication, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you take a long view of history, and you take a long view of what liberals have actually done, and you take a long view of vindictive government, vindictive institution, and vindictive people, if you just take a long view of that, there's a real warning there. There's a real big letters warning there that you are going to be vindicated. That once you have vindicated yourself, someone is going to vindicate themselves on you, because you can't become the king, you can't become the president of the United States without alienating half of the country. Right? And so the longer that we have this unspoken, unexamined, that's what it is. It's about the examination. See, it's about examination. One of my favorite quotes as a kid is, "The unexamined life isn't worth living." The unexamined life isn't worth living. And what that means isn't that if you don't examine your life, you shouldn't kill yourself. It means if you don't examine your life, you've put no value in it. You have invested nothing in it. And therefore, it's no value to you. It's not even worth the act of living to you, because you haven't lived it. Right? You haven't lived until you've examined what you've done. And so vindication, I guess, if I'm trying to look, and what I'm trying to do is what I'm always trying to do, I guess, in this project is, rather than identify a thing by itself, I'm trying to identify a thing by its opposite. Because like I said, negative identification is a lot easier to communicate. Because positive identification is pre-verbal. It's pre-verbal. It's sensual. It's Your feelings aren't your senses, but we include them in our senses. When we say sensual, we mean those things that we feel, but when I say sensual, I mean those things related to the five senses, and the feelings, the emotions, are not one of those things. But we use the same words, right? Feel, you feel with touch, you feel a thing emotionally. So they're linked in whatever way. But vindication must then, the opposite of vindication must be learning, right? If you feel vindicated in an experience, then you were right, and there is nothing to learn. That's what I'm thinking. Yep. With 10 minutes before the 2-hour warning, that's what I'm thinking about, is vindication. The opposite of vindication is learning. So to end an experience and feel like you were right, you haven't learned anything from it. And so if you don't learn anything from it, you haven't examined it thoroughly, which means that you're calling yourself an explorer in the same way that the woke identity and those who ascribe to it and those people who call themselves woke, are saying that you are dreaming, they are awake, they are aware of the reality of the world, and that their will is the only will which is possible to manifest because you are asleep to your will. In that same way that the woke identity is saying that, vindication is the refusal to live. So the opposite of vindication is life, living. How would you make that Latin, to live? Like vivification. Yeah, vivification is the opposite of vindication, right? Vini, vidi, vici, right? I came, I saw, I conquered, right? But vici doesn't actually mean conquered, I think. I think it means like I am. But yeah. Vici is probably the opposite of Vini in this case. I guess it would be Vivi more than, and that's funny because Vivi is my favorite character from Final Fantasy IX. But yeah, vivification, vivifying. That makes me think about Final Fantasy IX differently, and maybe I want to play Final Fantasy IX again, because that's got me thinking about Vivi's character arc and vivification and what he means, and what his character is trying to teach you, the player, but Zidane, the main character specifically. I've heard it pronounced Zidane, and Zidane. How do you pronounce it? Zidane? Now I've got myself distracted wanting to revisit Vivi in my mind. But yeah, living is learning, right? Have I made that religiously clear yet? Like, when people tell me like a tragedy, or they tell me a story about their lives, or they tell me a success, or they tell me anytime people share a moment with their lives, especially if it's a recent moment, and there's not a better question to ask to get them to continue to explore the moment in their own minds and in their own hearts in a different way than they explored it by expositing it to me, is to ask them, well, what did you learn? And I'm almost always disappointed, because usually people think that I'm being ironic, or that I'm suggesting that there was nothing to learn, or I'm looking for an ironic, i.e. sarcastic answer, but I'm not. I'm asking you genuinely, what did you learn? And people reject it because nobody wants to be instructed, right? Nobody wants to be led to the solutions to their problems by someone who can at a glance solve and rectify them in a sentence, right? But when you're like, oh, I made a minor mistake and it resulted in a minor, not even injury, just, minor injury to my pride even. And you go, well, what did you learn? And the answer is, well, don't do that. The answer could also be maybe you just pay more attention in your moment to moment, right? Or like if you trip over a piece of trash that's laying in the middle of the floor, it's like, well, what did you learn? The answer could be maybe don't leave trash on the floor, or maybe pick it up. Maybe don't just try to walk over it. And again, maybe just be more aware of your environment, like where your feet are, so that if you're going to make the choice to walk around it, you can at least make that choice. Occupy your life, thus, becomes like the mantra that I tell people. Pay attention. Like, you have these 5 senses. Use them, right? Like what you see with your eyeballs, you only see because you've already seen it. And so, like, for the most part, what's in your periphery and what's actually in front of you, you're not actually looking at. Your brain actually isn't bringing in new information. It's just telling you it's there because it was there before. And so, like, be aware of what's changing in your environment. And I'm not just saying that because I lost 2 rats to illness. And one of them, neither of which was prevented, but one of them suffered a lot longer maybe than he needed to because I didn't notice the illness. Right? Pay attention. That's what I'm saying. Pay attention. Like, the meaning of life is to fucking pay attention. And we reject that because we're all traumatized by our schooling and the way that we're schooled, and that you are required to pay attention to things that you don't want to pay attention to in school. But if this podcast, this video series that I'm doing, Talking to Myself, if this channel, Talking to Myself Gaming, is really about anything, it's demonstrating what paying attention looks like. Because I'm paying attention, but that doesn't mean that I'm any more aware, or it doesn't mean that I understand any better. It just means that I've noticed things because I've been paying attention. You can notice the patterns, right? You can notice the incidents. You can notice that there are coincidence, and you can notice that it's a pattern if you're paying attention to the incidents over time, right? But like I've said, our civilization only looks back on itself every 30 years, and I used to think that it was centuries that took, but that's not the case. That remains the case. Like, Moll Flanders makes that pretty clear that that's been the case. It takes 30 years for a civilization to look back on itself. It requires young people to become old people, and it requires enough prosperity within your civilization for young people to become old people. And so if your civilization is one in which the literate young people never become literate old people, or just young people never become literate old people, you never look back on yourself. And that's how the Middle Ages happened. And so that's where we are now. That's where we are right now. And so when I'm talking about vindication is being a young person, and vivification is being an old person. And see, me as a young person, I couldn't wait to be considered an adult and to be allowed to participate in adult conversation. And the longer that I'm an adult, the longer I notice 2 things. There are hierarchies of adult conversation, and you're not allowed to participate in the good conversation until your age has reached 50. Until you're 50 years old, you're not allowed to participate in the good conversations, which means that our government opening the doors to people in their early 30s is really just laughing at its constituency. Our government allowing representative figures to be elected in their 30s, or really before the age of 50, is just mocking. It's just mocking the constituency. It's mocking the voting base, right? Obama being allowed to be elected was a mockery of democracy because he wasn't allowed in the good conversations. He wasn't allowed in the good conversations. He wasn't allowed to have an opinion, and he most certainly wasn't allowed to add any amount of information that was going to change the minds of the people above 50. Because if you're going to change somebody's mind, you have to present the information to them in the way that they want to hear, because they have to change their minds. It's like I said, you could lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. You can dress a whore, but you can't make her fuck. Not legally, not morally, not without being a reprehensible person. And at 158 and 42, that feels like what vindication is. Vindication is the feeling of dressing the whore and getting to fuck her. It's vindication is toxic masculinity. Vindication is what feminists want to believe toxic masculinity is. It's chasing vindication. It's aiming yourself to always be vindicated. And in a lot of ways, vindication is feminism. And vindication is why the United States is no longer the greatest nation in the world. And it's why everything sucks. It's why every workplace sucks, feeling vindicated and finally getting your manager position. So now you don't have to work because you're not aiming toward the upper manager position quite yet. There's vindication of being the president. There's vindication of being elected to Congress. There's vindication of winning the Super Bowl. There's vindication. Everything. We're seeking vindication in everything. And I'll leave you on the real warning. It's not the vindication. The vindication is a tool. Vindication is self-motivation in a lot of ways. Even if the result of vindication, I almost said vindication, but vindication, even if the result of vindication is a positive feeling, a positive self-feeling, a positive self-identification, the act of vindication, the act of vindication is when you're a vendor and you're vindifying. You're like selling things. Vindication. Oh my God. Now the word is I've said it enough times that it's just become nonsense to me. Vindication is a tool. It's an emotion. It's self-motivation. But it's also falling in your own spike trap is what vindication is. And so if I'm going to leave you a warning, and it's something other than self-awareness, to be constantly examining yourself, like for tics. Constantly be examining yourself for tics, because while having a tick on your body is gross, and it growing into maturity and swelling to that big nasty thing on your body is gross, ticks also carry disease. And so if you're not checking yourself thoroughly, constantly, for your influences and whom you're quoting and whose ritual clothing you are in fact wearing and to whom you're being a battery, who's feeding on you, in other words. The first poem I ever wrote was about being fed on and being addicted to the being fed on. And that's what vampire fiction is about. Vampire media is about being in love and being addicted. Well, it always has characters that are a warning of the addiction of being fed on by the vampire, right? Because they always have a feeder pet, right? Vindication is the Fisher King, and the Fisher King always has a wound in his groin, which is psychosexual drama is what it's implying, but it's the, how do you say this? The after effect. So how do they say that? There's a euphemism for I can't remember the euphemism, but what you're left with after the vindication goes away is you're left with a sort of emptiness, what's next? And so maybe for the last 10 minutes I'll close on this. I've introduced how I've brought up that I've been studying and trying to read it and listen as much as I can about the heroine's journey and the warning, the risk of the quest for perfection. And so that's what women, specifically feminists, call being a feminist, a woman, a religious or spiritual woman, is that the the heroine's quest is the quest for perfection. But that's, first of all, it's just blatantly wrong, because if women were interested in spiritual perfection, they would also have monasteries, and they don't. A woman would have invented Buddhism. She didn't. A woman would have invented Zoroastrianism. She didn't. A woman would have died on the cross. She didn't. Women would have been alchemists. They weren't. If women were interested in the quest, the actual vindication of spiritual perfection, they would be the ones doing it. But that's not the case. See, where the heroine's journey goes wrong is that heroine don't go on journeys. Heroines don't go on journeys. The heroine isn't a journey. The heroine is the realization of the inner perfection that you began with. That in fact, women are born perfect, stainless, right? And the act of psychosexual drama is actually what makes a woman imperfect. That's why Mary, the mother, remained a virgin even after the Immaculate Birth, even after the births of Jesus's younger siblings. She remained spiritually virginal, and in fact, to some of the Christian interpretation, she never took Joseph to her bed. The explanation for Jesus having brothers and sisters was that Mary was one of many wives that Joseph took, and that Mary remained married to the God of the Jews. So the reason that any woman listening to this, and any trans man listening, or trans woman, listening to this, is confused is because you're trying to be a man. And so trans women are especially confused because they know that they want to be a woman. They know that they want their spiritual perfection to be the spiritual perfection, the path of spiritual perfection, which is a woman's. And the two-spirit and these other things, these attempts to say that there were coming-of-age rights for trans youth is false. It's just false. If you failed the coming of age to be a man, you just lived as a woman. It wasn't about being a bottom or being a top. It wasn't about psychosexual drama. It was about your work and your expectation of where you could be vindicated in reality. And so, like, if you couldn't become a warrior or a hunter, you couldn't vindicate yourself. You couldn't vindicate yourself from the bondage of housework. And housework was to be a woman. To be a wife was an entirely different thing than to be a woman. And to be a husband is an entirely different thing than to be a man. And to be a soldier and a king and all of these different things, these different titles, they're entirely different from being a man or a woman. To be a man or a woman is I've been over this. It's a specific thing. And and in the context of the pre-modern world, it was to be a free person. It was to entirely own yourself. It was to be vindicated of yourself. Was to be a man or a woman. A person who was vindicated of themselves was one or the other. And depending, obviously it did depend on gender. Like a man couldn't vindicate himself as a woman because it's not possible. And so today the whole woke, trans, whatever thing, gay, homosexual, LGBTQ thing is about vindicating yourself as a ritual object that you just can't. And so if you're familiar with fantasy literature, in a lot of ways what it is it's inhabiting your soul in a phylactery as a necromancer or as a lich, but the phylactery doesn't hold your soul. It can't hold your soul. It's either not enchanted to hold any soul, or it's barred from yours. It's already got somebody else's in it. And that's what I'm talking about, finding your way. So like in a lot of ways the woke thing is being jammed into single file on a way that doesn't belong to anyone, that no one should be taking. It's the left-hand path. I mean, we've talked about this, the left and the right hand, and liberalism is the left-hand path. You know, I mean, in a lot of ways, you know, the people that break things down into left and right hand paths would tell you that transitioning your gender is on the left hand path, that it's not taking the right hand or righteous path. But that historically doesn't make sense, because again, the quest to perfection is it's an XY pursuit, and so men questing to become the perfect woman is actually a spiritually male endeavor, and it makes sense. It doesn't make sense for women to want to be a perfect woman. Women don't want to be a perfect woman. They don't want to be married. They don't want to be that. Women want to live, right? Women need to live. In fact, in order to get pregnant, in order to live, like those things are synonymous. In order to get pregnant as a woman, in order to do your biological function as a woman, you have to live. Right? Because you can't vindicate yourself and incline a man to fuck you. Just can't. That's what I was talking about when I was talking about these liberal women that want to jump online and talk shit about men. Well, they're vindicating themselves. They're avenging themselves on men. Well, a man is attracted to you to avenge you on another man, to prove his worth to you by killing that other man, either ritually or really, either practically or actually. And I don't know. If you've ever actually read any feminist literature, and this isn't where I want to end, but I'm at 2:15, so I do have to end. If you've ever read any feminist literature, the whole science of feminism is wrong on its face. It was wrong with the first lady. I forgot her name. I started reading her, but when she got to saying that all male humans are unthinking brutes incapable of higher thought, I just thought to myself, okay, well, you're saying the exact same thing that the men contemporary to you are saying about women. You're just saying it to women. So you're not actually creating a workable, functional worldview. You're just spewing hate to get fans and likes on the internet before the internet existed. So I can't remember her name. She was a fraud. She was a charlatan and a demagogue, and she stood up in front of you and just spewed hate to vindicate you, or at least make you feel vindicated vicariously through her vindication. Because she most certainly vindicated herself of the men in her community, but she most certainly didn't liberate you. And I let that silence run long because I was going to let you believe that was the end, but it's not. I would like to say my thank yous. Thank you for watching. It's really cool that you made it to the end this far. Today's was maybe a little even more disjointed than normal because I waited too long to do this. So I'm making the promise to myself to do this again tomorrow, no matter what. We'll see how that goes. And then post it at an appropriate time. I don't expect anyone to listen to this all the way through. I'm going to give myself 3 minutes to actually accomplish the promise that I made you for this video. I don't expect anyone to listen to these through all the way in one sitting. I like long-form audio in this way. I would listen to these back, and in fact do sometimes listen to these back. I don't do it as much as I would maybe like to because I don't want to give myself views, right? I don't want to be that guy who's giving himself likes and shares, right, on fake accounts. Just because I do want to listen back to what I've had to say because I do like what I've made. What I expect is that I'll get your attention for 7 minutes at a time. And so what I would like is for those 7-minute chunks to contain meaning and to bring you back. I don't want to change your mind. I do want to influence your thinking. So if I have done that at all, please let me know what you're thinking about. Thanks for watching. The next one will be sooner than this one was.